On the western edge of the Atlantic, a huge luxury ocean liner is sailing towards New York in dense fog through a busy shipping lane. A ship is picked up on radar approaching from ahead, but they should pass each other with half a mile between them. A lookout is at the bow on alert to see the ship through the fog, but when the lights come fully into view, it's heading straight towards them. The captain orders hard to port to escape the collision, but it's too late. What happens next leaves everyone confused, many families heartbroken, and one girl dubbed a miracle. At 0800 on the 17th of July 1956, the first 277 passengers begin boarding the SS Andrea Doria in Genoa, Italy. The Andrea Doria is a luxury ocean liner belonging to the Italian line, and it's widely regarded as a beautiful, luxurious ship. There are 3 separate passenger classes, each with their own dining rooms, lounges, promenades, deck areas, and swimming pools. Paintings, statues, and ceramic friezes adorn the social areas, and food is served on fine china with silverware. The ship's an impressive size with a length of 214 meters, a beam of 27 meters, and a draft of 9 meters below the waterline. With 10 decks, it's the largest Italian ship of its day. The ship's powered by steam turbine engines linked to twin propellers. These give the liner a top speed of 26 knots and a cruising speed of 23 knots. Shortly after 1100, under the command of Captain Piero Calamai, the ship starts its journey from Genoa. This will be the 52nd westbound voyage for the Andrea Doria, sailing from Genoa to New York over the previous 3 years. Mid-afternoon the same day, 48 passengers embark at Cannes on the French Riviera. The liner then sets course southeast for Naples in southern Italy, 400 nautical miles away. 744 passengers join in Naples the next morning. 2 days later, the liner stops one last time in Gibraltar to collect the last 56 passengers. Altogether, 1,134 passengers will make the trip, with a crew of 572. That makes a total of 1,706 people who depart on the Andrea Doria's transatlantic journey. The ship steams across the Atlantic, making good time over the next 8 days. The passengers enjoy the ship's facilities and the mild summer weather as they contemplate what lies ahead in the United States of America. Some are heading there to start new lives. On the 25th of July, as the time approaches midday, the Andrea Doria is on the far western edge of the Atlantic towards Nantucket Island. Nantucket Island signals the arrival of the coastal area on the approach to New York and the last stage of the Andrea Doria's journey. In New York Harbor, the passenger liner motor vessel Stockholm is about to set sail on its 103rd eastbound crossing of the Atlantic to its home port of Gothenburg, Sweden. The Stockholm is owned and operated by the Swedish-American Line and is the 4th liner in the company to bear the name Stockholm. Built and registered in the port of Gothenburg in 1946, the ship is 160 meters long with a beam of 21 meters and a draft of 8 meters. While it's a sizable ship, the Stockholm is actually the smallest passenger liner in the North Atlantic run at the time. Because the course it sails between New York and Gothenburg takes it very close to the Arctic area, the ship is fitted with a strong ice-breaking bow. The Stockholm departs New York Harbor just before midday under the command of Captain Harry Gunnar Nordenson, setting sail at full capacity with 534 passengers and a crew of 208. The ship makes good time as it sails towards the open Atlantic waters past Nantucket Island. At 20:30, Third Officer Johan Carstens takes over the watch on the Stockholm. It's an important day for Third Officer Carstens. He's a young officer at 26 years old, and this is the first time he's left alone on the ship's bridge with full responsibility for its safety. He's had a busy day, supervising baggage loading and passenger boarding since 0600. When Carstens takes command, the Stockholm is cruising under clear skies, making near top speed at about 18 knots. He estimates visibility is around 6 nautical miles. Meanwhile, the Andrea Doria continues its inbound journey towards New York Harbor. It's getting closer to the Nantucket Shoals lightship, which is located a little over 45 miles southeast of Nantucket Island. The Nantucket Shoals lightship is like a floating lighthouse that marks a hazardous area of shallow water. The Andrea Doria has been enveloped in fog for about 5.5 hours. The waters of the North Atlantic around the area of Nantucket Island frequently have fog. Cold currents from the Labrador Sea meet the warm Gulf Stream, causing the perfect condition for fog to settle over the water. Experienced sailors know to be wary of the fog in these shallow waters. The officer on watch on the bridge of the Andrea Doria is Senior Second Officer Curzio Francini. He's assisted by Junior Third Officer Eugenio Giannini, who's manning the radar, while Captain Piero Calamai oversees the ship's command while they sail through the fog. Calamai has ordered the ship's fog whistle to be sounded for 6 seconds every 100 seconds. He's placed a lookout on the peak of the bow with phone contact to the bridge, and he's ordered all the ship's watertight doors to be closed. He's also reduced the Andrea Doria's speed, but only by a token amount, dropping from 23 to 21.8 knots. The Andrea Doria's inbound route from the Atlantic just south of the Nantucket Lightship is the normal westbound route for ships of its kind. The area of the Atlantic around Nantucket gets heavy ship traffic, and it's known as the Times Square of the Atlantic. While official agreements are in place to separate eastbound and westbound ships, it's not until 1966 that the International Maritime Organization introduces traffic separation schemes, which act like highways with different lanes in busy shipping areas. But it's 1956, and even though there are agreements in place, they're not strictly enforced. Normally, westbound ships follow the same path that the Andrea Doria is on, and eastbound ships sail 20 miles further to the south. The Stockholm is used to following an eastbound route that takes it just south of the Nantucket Lightship in the path of the westbound ships. This route saves time, and Captain Nordenson on the Stockholm has chosen to take it again today. At around 2100, Nordenson comes up on the bridge to make a final check of the Stockholm. The ship is running full speed ahead at 18.5 knots in smooth seas. There's a gentle breeze out to the southwest, and the air temperature is a mild 70 degrees Fahrenheit. An almost full moon can be seen off the starboard bow, and visibility is still estimated at around 6 nautical miles with a hazy horizon. From here on, the movements of both the Andrea Doria and the Stockholm become shrouded in both fog and controversy, with debate about what actually happens that continues today. Here's how events unfold over the next 2 hours according to the testimony from the crewmen involved. At about 21:20 on the Andrea Doria, Giannini picks up the Nantucket Shoals Lightship on radar dead ahead at a distance of about 17 miles. At 21:40, Calamai orders the Andrea Doria's course to be changed from 267 to 261 degrees when the Nantucket Lightship is about 14 miles away. The intent is to pass about 1.5 miles to the south of the stationary lightship. At the same time, Nordenson, who is still on the bridge of the Stockholm, orders a course change from 090 to 087 degrees. This will take the Stockholm between 1 and 2 miles south of the Nantucket Lightship as well. Nordenson leaves the bridge at around 2200, and Carstens is alone in charge of the Stockholm. Nordenson leaves standing orders that he be called at once if fog or any other significant weather conditions are encountered. At 2204, Carstens decides to fix the Stockholm's location by taking bearings from radio beacons at Block Island and the Nantucket Lightship. The fix shows his ship is drifting more northerly than it should, and at 2210 he orders a course change from 087 to 089 degrees to compensate. At 2220, the Andrea Doria has the Nantucket Lightship around 1 mile off its starboard beam. Calamai orders a course change from 261 to 268 degrees to put his ship on a heading for the Ambrose Channel Lightship and the entrance to the New York harbor. At 2240, the helmsman on the Stockholm is changed. Helmsman Peter Larsen takes over during the shift change, and from the moment he takes control of the ship, he seems to lack concentration, allowing the ship's heading to yaw several degrees to either side of the course line the entire time he's at helm. Just before 2246, the Andrea Doria picks up the Stockholm on radar at a distance of about 17 nautical miles and a bearing of 4 degrees to starboard. 7 minutes later, at 2253, the Stockholm registers the Andrea Doria on its radar at a distance of about 12 miles. Neither ship makes contact with the other via radio, and they continue navigating without discussing the course they will take as they pass. Carstens decides to plot the fast-approaching Andrea Doria on a radar plotting board. He plots his first point at 22:56, with the Andrea Doria at a distance of 10 miles bearing 2 degrees to port. He plots a second point at 23:02 with the ship at 6 miles bearing 4 degrees to port. Connecting the 2 points, he sees that the approaching ship should pass on the port side at a distance of about half a mile. That's closer than Captain Nordenson would allow, but what really concerns him is that he can't see the ship's lights. It's nighttime with a bright moon shining from about 20 degrees off the starboard bow. Visibility appears clear. What Carstens doesn't realize is that there's dense fog settled over the water in the dark ahead of the ship. As the Stockholm and the Andrea Doria approach each other head-on, the westbound Italian liner is hidden by this invisible fog bank. The eastbound Stockholm will soon be entering this fog bank from its western edge. More experienced sailors may have recognized the situation unfolding. I get the sense that Carstens can tell something doesn't add up, but he hasn't worked it out yet. The Andrea Doria's fog whistle is sounding, but the ship is traveling fast. Calamai only reduced the speed to 21.8 knots, which is still faster than the Stockholm is traveling. With the Stockholm traveling at 18 knots, the two ships are approaching each other at a combined speed of 40 knots. The only information they have about each other's position or heading is a blip on the radar. The Andrea Doria's radar shows the Stockholm is at 4 degrees to starboard when the ships are 17 miles apart and 14 degrees to starboard at 5 miles apart. Based on these readings, the ships will pass each other with the closest point of approach at 0.84 nautical miles. These readings suggest the two ships will make a starboard to starboard pass. Carstens on the Stockholm is expecting the ships to pass port to port, so something doesn't add up. When the ships are at a distance of 3.5 miles, Calamai orders a 4-degree course change to port to open up the distance between the two ships. He's chosen to go for a relatively close-range starboard to starboard pass. Maritime convention dictates that when ships meet head-on, they'll steer to pass each other port to port, in the same way you would driving on the right-hand side of a highway. When the course change is made, Giannini reports the Stockholm is bearing 19 degrees to starboard of their new heading line. Shortly after, he looks at the radar again, and this shows the Stockholm at a distance of about 1.5 miles bearing 32.5 degrees to starboard. Plotting these two new points gives a new closest point for the two ships. It appears that the Stockholm has made a small course change at the same point in time, and the distance between the two ships has closed rather than opened up. According to the new readings, the ships should pass each other at a distance of 0.59 miles, despite Calamai's course change. Meanwhile, on the Stockholm, Carstens plots the oncoming ship on his radar screen when it's between 1.8 and 1.9 miles away. He believes it will pass on the port side, with its bearing now at 20 degrees to port. This is the opposite of what the Andrea Doria is expecting. Tracking the Andrea Doria's course with the two radar readings taken earlier and this new reading, Carstens now expects the Andrea Doria to pass the Stockholm at a distance of 0.52 miles on its port side. At 23:09, Carstens takes his last radar reading and the ships are 1.3 miles apart. He scans the ocean and sees the lights of the Andrea Doria closer than he expects, still bearing 20 degrees to port. The crew on the Andrea Doria haven't yet seen the Stockholm. Carstens decides to order a 24-degree turn to starboard to widen the gap of a port-to-port passing. 1 minute later, at 23:10, the ships are 0.6 miles apart. The turn Carstens ordered is complete. Now, the crew on the Andrea Doria see the Stockholm. Calamai and Giannini on the Andrea Doria see a faint glow of light through the fog from the starboard side of the bridge. Francini leaves his radar station to answer a phone call from the lookout on the bow, who reports he sees lights to starboard. The collision is inevitable. On the Stockholm, Carstens goes to his port bridge wing and sees the Andrea Doria showing a green starboard light. It's about to cross the Stockholm's bow, traveling from left to right. Carstens immediately orders the wheel be put hard to starboard Then he runs to the engine telegraph to ring full astern on the engines in the hope that he can stop the ship before they collide. The crew on the Andrea Doria now see the lights of the Stockholm clear through the fog. Calamai and his officers see the oncoming ship showing a red portside light. The oncoming ship is turning directly into them. Calamai calls out for the wheel to be put hard to port to try and outrun the collision. But it's too late. The collision is unavoidable. 30 seconds later, the reinforced ice-breaking bow of the Stockholm plows into the starboard side of the Andrea Doria just behind the bridge wing. The Stockholm's bow penetrates the hull of the Andrea Doria below the waterline, which immediately takes on a heavy starboard list. 5 fuel tanks on the starboard side tear open and fill with thousands of gallons of seawater, further exaggerating the list. Air becomes trapped in the 5 empty fuel tanks on the port side, causing them to float, which increases the starboard list even further. The Andrea Doria is divided into 11 watertight compartments, each separated by steel bulkheads running the width of the vessel and as high up as a deck. The Stockholm has only penetrated one of these compartments, but there's a problem. The ship can survive a 15-degree list. Past this, water can flow over the top of the bulkheads and fill the next compartments. The flooded starboard fuel tanks and air-full portside fuel tanks create a starboard list over 20 degrees in a very short space of time. The Andrea Doria is doomed. Calamai quickly realizes the Andrea Doria is sinking, and within 10 minutes of the collision, he orders an SOS to be broadcast for the Andrea Doria. Calamai was hoping to outrun the Stockholm, so he didn't reduce the ship's speed. The Andrea Doria's speed and momentum shears 10 meters off the Stockholm's bow. The Stockholm is in serious danger of sinking. Water flooding the forward bulkhead compartment drives the bow down. There's some quick thinking on the Stockholm's bridge. They decide to empty the freshwater tanks, which provides enough buoyancy to raise the bow to within 10 centimeters of its normal draft. A quick survey shows that the major damage is limited to compartment 1. The bulkhead between the first and second watertight compartments is secure. In spite of the ship's condition, Captain Nordenson believes the Stockholm is stable and in no immediate danger of sinking. He orders the lifeboats into the water with crew to assist passengers off the Andrea Doria and transfer them to the Stockholm. The Andrea Doria has enough lifeboats to evacuate all of the ship's passengers and crew. They split equally either side of the ship on an upper level. They're lowered one level to the promenade deck where passengers are loaded in an emergency. From there, they're lowered in a near vertical line to the water. Unfortunately, the ship's heavy starboard list means the portside lifeboats can't be lowered. Half the ship's lifeboats are unusable, and the starboard lifeboats have to be lowered into the sea before passengers can be loaded. It's a difficult operation. A system of ropes and Jacob's ladders are rigged for people to climb down to the lifeboats. Half the Andrea Doria's lifeboats are rendered useless. Loading people into the remaining lifeboats is slow and difficult. There are over 1,700 people on board. If they can load half the passengers into lifeboats, that leaves over 800 people on board. The evacuation is assisted by the Stockholm's lifeboats, but it urgently needs more help. The Stockholm is too small a ship to take everyone on board, and between them there aren't enough lifeboats to evacuate everyone. Progress is slow, and the Andrea Doria could sink before they get everyone off the ship. The collision is in a busy shipping lane, and ships begin to respond to the Andrea Doria's SOS message. First to arrive on the scene is the freighter Cape Ann, which deploys its 2 40-seater lifeboats to help shuttle passengers from the stricken Andrea Doria to the Stockholm. The next vessel to arrive is the US Navy transport vessel Private William H. Thomas, under the command of Captain John Shea, who's placed in charge of the rescue operation by the US Navy. He immediately orders his crew to prepare their 8 lifeboats. Also joining the rescue is the US Navy destroyer escort USS Edward H. Allen. The Andrea Doria's starboard lifeboats have been deployed, but so far many are only partially loaded, with around 200 panicked crewmen and very few passengers. The other ships are helping, but well over 1,000 people are still trapped on board the Andrea Doria. They need more help. The French line's SS Ile-de-France is 44 nautical miles east. At 241 meters in length and a total capacity of over 2,500 people, this sizable luxury liner has enough lifeboats to save the passengers and crew on board the Andrea Doria. More so, it has the capacity to take all the survivors on board. The Ile-de-France is under the command of Captain Raoul de Baudin, who served with the French liner for 35 years. The ship is eastbound from New York to its home port of Le Havre, France. At first, Baudin decides not to head straight to the scene. He believes that a modern ship like the Andrea Doria is unlikely to be in serious danger of sinking. He also wants to avoid changing course because that would mean returning to New York to refuel, which will delay the ship's journey. Nonetheless, he follows maritime law and attempts to contact the Andrea Doria by radio. At first, he's unable to make contact. Then he gets through to the other ships and their captains assure him that the lives of over 1,000 people are at risk. Captain Baudin immediately orders his ship to turn about and set course for the collision site. Less than 3 hours later, the Ile-de-France approaches the area. Captain Baudin orders all exterior lights of the Ile-de-France to be turned on. The illuminated ship is a huge relief to everyone trapped on the Andrea Doria. Captain Baudin positions his ship off the starboard side of the Andrea Doria to provide shelter from the wind and waves. The Ile-de-France is able to rescue the bulk of the remaining passengers from the Andrea Doria by shuttling 10 lifeboats back and forth between the two ships. In all, 1,663 passengers and crew are rescued from the Andrea Doria. One man slept through the whole thing, waking in time to be rescued. The badly damaged Stockholm takes on a total of 545 survivors, of whom 234 are crew members from the Andrea Doria who left their vessel ahead of the passengers. 129 survivors are rescued by the Cape Ann, 159 by the US Navy's Private William H. Thomas, and 77 by the USS Edward H. Allen, including Captain Calamai and his officers. The bridge crew of the Andrea Doria managed to maintain calm on their ship while executing a demanding rescue of virtually all the ship's passengers. The ship's officers are the last to leave the ship. Captain Calamai initially tries to remain on the ship, intent on going down with it, but is persuaded not to by his crew. All told, 46 passengers and crew of the Andrea Doria lost their lives in the disaster. 43 die in the initial collision, while another 3 are killed during the rescue. One of the 3 people killed in the rescue is a young girl who's dropped by her panicked father into a lifeboat and sustains a head injury. 5 crew members stationed at the front of the Stockholm died in the initial collision as well. Amongst the 1,663 survivors on the Andrea Doria is a young 14-year-old girl, Linda Morgan, who becomes known as the Miracle Girl. Linda is asleep, together with her half-sister in their cabin, which is positioned in the Stockholm's impact zone underneath the Andrea Doria's bridge. When the ships collide, her half-sister is killed. Her stepfather in the next-door cabin is killed, and her mother is seriously injured. Linda is knocked out of her bunk and lands safely on the foredeck of the Stockholm. She's found by a crew member who hears her calling for her mother. A Spanish-speaking crewman is able to translate. "I was on the Andrea Doria, where am I now?" At 09:45 on Thursday the 26th of July 1956, just over 10 hours after the collision, the Andrea Doria finally begins to sink. The ship's been fully evacuated. By 1000, the ship's starboard side starts dipping into the ocean. The bow then slides under. The stern rises slightly and the port propeller and shaft become visible. As the port side slips below the waterline, some of the unused lifeboats snap free of their davits and float upside down in a row. The ship sinks at 10:09 after drifting almost 1.6 nautical miles from the point of collision. All 43 people killed on the Andrea Doria during the collision are left entombed in the ship when it sinks. Following the sinking of the Andrea Doria, there are several months of inquiries into what caused the two ships to collide. Officers from both sides give their accounts of the accident. More evidence is due to be given when the Italian and Swedish-American shipping lines reach an out-of-court settlement. Each shipping line absorbs its own damages. The Swedish-American line's damages are assessed at $2 million, while the Italian line sustains the loss of the full value of the Andrea Doria, estimated at $30 million. Both shipping lines contribute to a fund to support families of the victims. Heavy fog is given as the main cause of the disaster, but there are questions about the decisions from both crews. One important question that's raised is if anyone is lying about their version of events. The Andrea Doria expects the ships to pass starboard to starboard, while Carstens on the Stockholm expects the ships to pass port to port. Carstens says he saw the Andrea Doria on his port side, which seems to not make sense. We'll probably never understand exactly what happened, but this is my interpretation. The Stockholm is heading east in what is regarded as a westbound channel. That's not alarming to Captain Calamai on the Andrea Doria. He simply anticipates the Stockholm will hold its bearing and they'll pass starboard to starboard with almost a mile between them. They barely slow down. Carstens on the Stockholm is not as experienced and decides to follow maritime convention to pass port to port even though they aren't on a collision course. He doesn't see the fog. Each ship then makes course corrections to assure their expectations are met. Neither ship makes contact to coordinate their course. They simply assume that what they expect to happen will actually happen. A friend of mine's dad was a commander in the Navy. He'd say to us that you get what you inspect, not what you expect. The Stockholm expects to pass port to port, so they keep turning right in small course alterations to ensure they pass port to port. The Andrea Doria expects to pass starboard to starboard, so they keep turning left incrementally to ensure they pass starboard to starboard. They're both simply turning into each other's path. When they look at the radar, they can see the blip on the screen, which confirms the ship is on the side they expect. And each time they make a course alteration, it keeps the ship on that side. The fog is so thick that they can't see each other's lights, which would give them more information about which side of the ship they can actually see. If either ship had made an obvious change in direction to indicate their intentions at an early stage, this would have helped the other ship plan its course. Or perhaps just picking up the radio to make contact with the other ship would have avoided the collision. At least the officers of the Andrea Doria acted honorably and stayed on board to ensure the evacuation of the ship, which is more than I can say for the officers of the Oceanus. I'll leave a link to that video here.